Hi, my name is Mark Lanza. I'm president of the Motion Picture Sound Editors. Welcome to our Sound Advice event for September 1st, 2020. We are streaming only again due to COVID-19. We have a lot of Sound Advice events coming up, so please check your email if you're a member and the MPSE Facebook page for details. We have invited non-members to this event today, so please consider joining if you are not already a member, because a lot of these are member-only events. We are also currently streaming on Facebook Live. So anyway, I would like to thank Eric Marks from our board of directors for setting up this sound show we're about to partake in. And so please take it away, Eric.
Thank you, Mark. As Mark said, my name is Eric Marks, and our guest tonight is an Emmy winner and is also the winner of 3 MPSE Golden Reel Awards. He's worked on shows such as Succession, Silicon Valley, Tales from the Crypt, Hercules, and Ozark. His work on features includes Beauty and the Beast, Doubt, Inside Man, 25th Hour, Ice Age, Sleepy Hollow, and Capote. I'm honored to be joined by the supervising sound editor and mixer observant, Sean Garnhart. Sean, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much, Eric, especially for all the organizational work you did and for everybody at the MPSE for having me. I'm actually thrilled to be doing this, and I think it's very cool that Servant is being recognized as something worth talking about, because it's not really a shoot 'em up, crash 'em, huge, loud show. So it's so fun to be talking about it. I'm happy to answer any questions, but first I was hoping it would be fun for everybody if we just talked about how my team and I approach the sound on this show. This is a half-hour Apple TV Plus series by M. Night Shyamalan. And like I said, it's not a very noticeably sound-heavy show. But we definitely put a lot of work into it and have a good time doing it, so I thought I'd talk about it a little bit. One thing that was interesting to me when I read the script for the pilot was almost the entire show takes place in a brownstone in Philadelphia. And some of my first thoughts about that after reading the script were, how the heck am I going to make each room sound different? Is that even going to be necessary? And then I started realizing, most importantly, that, what freedom is the story going to give me to make those rooms sound different? So another thought I had while I was reading the script and thinking about it was, I know M. Night Shyamalan loves and cares about sound and sonic storytelling. He often leaves a ton of space in his work for sound and music. And in other words, his stuff isn't plastered with dialogue wall to wall. There's room to hear other things, which is a huge bonus for us sound geeks. I love that. And I say that lovingly, of course, because I'm one myself. And in my experience with Night's projects, his production sound is usually fantastic, which is also a huge bonus. So when there are words, we can not only hear them, but there's space in between them that is usable. And when there aren't any words, there's usually fantastic production sound that might be able to be used in the final mix. So that was very exciting to me. And when I finally got to see some footage and talk to Night myself, I got very, very excited, because it became very clear to me that sound effects and Foley were going to be a huge, important part of bringing this house and the entire show to life. So I was excited. So I figured I'd talk about what I do, or how I approach something. Let's talk about backgrounds. I almost always start with those. I know that a lot of sound editors start with the big scenes and do the hard effects, and I just don't do that for some reason. I like building backgrounds and creating a foundation for everything else to live in. And it's usually a great time for me to kind of wrap my head around what the world is going to sound like that we're trying to create. I love backgrounds. I think they're massively important. I am not a vanilla tone slab in the center channel and then walk away backgrounds person. I definitely use the vanilla tone in the center to support the dialogue when needed, but otherwise I cut or ask my crew to cut any other sound that has movement, motion, ebbs and flows, peaks and valleys, stuff that will really make the location sound interesting. So how was I going to do that, or how was I going to have Mark, my awesome effects editor on this show, do that? And after speaking with Knight, Knight really wanted to make sure that we differentiated the sides of the house. So there's a front of the house and there's a back of the house. The front of the house is on an actual street in Philadelphia. And so we thought about that, and there would be more car bys. There'd be people walking by. There'd be more automobile sounds like doors, horns, car alarms. So that was kind of our palette for the front of the house. And the back of the house, it has a patio on it, and then it's supposed to open up to a park, a city park. We as viewers have never seen this city park, but Knight assures me it's there. So we are supposed to be playing that less traffic-y, less automobile-based. So we're trying to do it more with dogs, kids, definitely less traffic. Maybe some wildlife, maybe some birds, but Knight is not a huge fan of Tweety birds. He doesn't mind crows and death-like birds, but no Tweety birds. So dogs and kids have definitely been helping the back side of the house come to life. So that's one aspect of BGs that we were thinking about. Another huge aspect of backgrounds in this show is weather, which I love cutting weather. I just think it's a fun puzzle to put together to create a reality with weather. Servant has storms, it has winds, it has rains. It also has lack of weather sometimes, which helps, again, I'm talking about differentiating BGs. When we have flashbacks in the show, oftentimes the A side of the flashback is in a storm and the B side is in this beautiful day, or the other way around. But that way, again, visually, yes, we're getting cues that we're in different places, but we aren't always getting those visual cues. So it's awesome to be able to have a raging storm on one side of the flashback, and then peaceful sounds on the B side of the flashback. So that's another talking about BGs. And I also just wanted to run this by you guys because I find this to be helpful and have talked to some other editors about this. When I'm cutting backgrounds, I use a formula. No matter what I am building, what kind of scene I'm building, I use a formula. I have about 5 background pre-dubs: airs, traffics, critters, walla, and pop-outs. I feel like if I can get all of those for a scene, then I'm pretty certain I'm covered. And I keep those separate as pre-dubs so that I have flexibility, or the mixer has flexibility. In this case, I am the mixer, but either way, I'm trying to think about organization. So airs is pretty obvious. Airs would be the more vanilla tones, maybe some subtle winds, but I might save those for another pre-dub just so I have more flexibility. Traffics, again, pretty straightforward. Cars, dins. If we're in a meadow, I still think about a traffic being a very distant lower end din. So I might have a nice whistly grassy wind in a meadow, but then I would add a thicker, more girthy din, which I would put on the traffic pre-dub so that, again, I have flexibility. And again, if we're in space, do we have traffic in space? Well, sure we do. We could have asteroids going by, or distant spaceships, or a rumble. I would put that on my traffic pre-dub. Critters is another pre-dub I use in backgrounds, and that would be birds, crickets, cicadas. But I would also put beeps or buzzers in the critters pre-dub. Again, if we're in space, or if we're in a launch room for a spaceship or something like that, we're not going to have birds or crickets in space. Maybe, I guess it depends on the project. But anyway, I'm not trying to be too black and white with my pre-dub breakdown, but I definitely try to keep things separate. The next one I think about is walla. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. One thing I did want to say about that is sometimes I put movement and presence of people in the walla pre-dub as well. I've done a lot of recording of people milling and walking around with no voices on purpose. So I've recorded them on dirt, and I've recorded them on gravel, and I've recorded them in a creaky wood floor. And I make stereo recordings of those. It's not, I don't really think of them as Foley because I normally think of it more as field effects, where I grab 5, 6 people. Sometimes my family, regrettably, they're the ones that regret it, not me. I love what they give me. But anyway, I record people moving around and not talking. And that is a fantastic layer to add to the wall of pre-dubs because, you know, oftentimes the client might say, oh, that sounds like too many people, or we don't need anything else than what production is bringing. And that might be the case, and that's fine. It's very easy to lose the walla then, but I still have these presence or movement or milling pre-dubs. And even if they don't work in the domestic, they're fantastic for the M&Es because they help the M&Es be more lifelike and real. The last pre-dub I use for backgrounds are pop-outs. Anything that I want to keep separate that brings detail to the scene that might either be, I might want to raise or lower or lose. So thunder crashes, car horns, dog barks, specific off-screen car buys, not on-screen. I would put the on-screen car buys in hard effects, but off-screen, there's a lot of off-screen truck buys in Servant outside the house that are in the pop-out pre-dubs. Maybe pedestrian call-outs, sirens. Again, anything that I don't want to have married to one of those other pre-dubs I mentioned. So that's how I kind of approach BGs. Then there's sound effects and Foley. And I just wanted to quickly talk about that too. When I started in this business, I lived in Los Angeles. I lived there for about 7 years, and I was taught to think and design in pre-dubs or premixes. There's different names for them. Some people call them food groups. I'm always thinking about groups, whether we call them pre-dubs, premixes, or food groups, or whatever the heck you want to call them. But I think editing is 2 things, really. I think editing is making sounds work to picture, but it's also organizing those sounds so that they're easy to locate and adjust. Both are equally important to me. Mark knows this well. Mark Phillip is my effects editor and designer on this show. And I did want to quickly say, even though I'm the supervising sound editor, I don't get to cut anything on this show, which is so different for me because I love to cut. I love to cut and I love to mix. I love to have that line with the client all the way through. And it is so odd not cutting. Mark and I have been working together for over 20 years, I think. And he is a fantastic human being who is so willing and eager to give me what I want and bring his own ideas to the table. So he knows a lot about pre-dubs and organizing and how incredibly anal I am about getting things from him a certain way. So anyway, but the reason I like things well organized is because although I love creating or having somebody else create and sync fantastic sounds, I am so into thinking about the next person in the filmmaking chain, whether it's the mixer or the person making the deliverables. It's so important, I think, to think about that person and realize that they may have no idea what they are going to have in front of them. And if it's organized and simple to deal with, it just makes life so much easier for them, especially when they have a client behind them asking them to do something very quickly. So I organize hard effects very similarly to backgrounds, I think, in pre-dubs. For example, a car crash, I think we might have all cut a car crash or at least heard one. I think about that at least in 4 different groups: engines and revs, tires, skids, metal crashes, and glass crashes. And the reason I'm thinking in pre-dubs, besides the reason I'm thinking in organization, is because a lot of times sounds are controversial. We talked about whether the walla would be too much, or maybe that siren, maybe Knight doesn't want the siren in the scene of Servant right now. It's so easy to lose if it's in a separate pre-dub. Another reason I keep stuff in pre-dubs is being able to manipulate something once I've heard it with dialogue or music. Again, with a car crash situation, you know, the music might be bringing these awesome, loud, high energy horns. not car horns, but brass horns. And if you have tire skids as well, or glass crashes as well, one of them has to give to the other one. And so the car crash may not sound exactly like it did in your cutting room or my cutting room, but if I have the glass or the skids separate, I can manipulate things so that the horns of the music take this frame of the picture and then the skids take this frame. It just depends on the kinetic movement of that shot. But it's so nice to have things separate and know exactly where they are so that it's easier to mix. So Servant doesn't have any car crashes yet, but the same exact thought process can be applied to simple things like doors. There's 1,000 doors in this show. I'm exaggerating, but there's a lot of doors, and Mark does an amazing job cutting these doors. It usually is quite a few tracks because of the amount of detail the doors require and what he wants to bring to the table. But I always ask that the door be in one predub and the creaks for the squeaks be in another. Again, so if something is controversial or if I want to accentuate something, sometimes it's eerier to not hear the door, but just hear the creak. Or sometimes we don't want to creak. Again, it's so much easier to grab. Another thing in effects that is so easy or so wonderful to have separated out is weather. We talked about that in backgrounds, but I often, because weather is so many elements, winds, rains, thunder, maybe different details of rain, it's nice to have those things separated out. Another thing in Servant that we have a lot of is cooking. And there are a lot of very jarring, sometimes jarring, but always extreme close-up shots of the main character, Sean, cooking. And having that laid out in an organized fashion makes it a lot easier to get through those sequences as the mixer anyway. And so again, I appreciate how Mark is laying those things out. But I did want to add that sometimes with these very quick shots, thinking in predubs is not, I think of predubs differently that way. So while the car crash might have the engines separate from the skids, what I might do, or I might ask Mark to do for the cooking, is have shot A be predub A, and shot B be predub B, and shot C be predub C, because the shots are so quick. It might just be easier to just grab the shot that you want to stand out depending on what is happening with the dialogue and music. However, if there are controversial elements in each of those shots, as I'm going to show you very soon, it's nice to have those separate too. So what I thought I'd do is show you the first scene of the last episode from last season, where Sean is preparing an ornate appetizer out of the placenta of his child. And he's in his kitchen doing this. And I figured I'd show it to you without any of our contribution first, because I did want you to hear how fabulous the production sound is. And I wanted you to hear what the music was doing too, because our composer is fantastic. His name is Trevor Gurekis, and he's bringing so many awesome elements and layers to the score. It's so fun to work with his material along with the sound design that's coming to the stage. So anyway, that's super fun. But anyway, I wanted to show it to you just with, this is actually a 2 Pro Tools mix. There's 2 Pro Tools that I use to mix this show. I only have one in my home studio, so I am going to play you the dialogue stem, the PFX stem, and the music stem, and then we'll go through some of the sound design in a moment. But I wanted you to just listen to this sequence and watch the sequence with what we are given before we do any work. So let me share my screen. And play you the sequence.
There are several conflicting theories regarding the disposal of your child's placenta. Religious, superstitious, and medicinal. You can ingest it for nutritional value. to cure or prevent postpartum depression. You can throw it into the river in the belief that your child's life will be carried on the constant stream. Or you can bury it in the ground, smooth side up, to ward off evil spirits.
Love that.
Or you can bury it in the ground, smooth side up, to ward off evil spirits. Whichever option you choose, the significance of your child's placenta is the same. As one life comes into being, another ends.
All right, so that's cool, especially the error there. That was really fun. Everybody hearing that okay? Eric, thumbs up. Is that cool? All right, very good. All right, so that's what we got to start with, and then we decided to have some fun with this sequence. So let me play it all the way through again with our contribution, and then I'm going to point out some things.
There are several conflicting theories regarding the disposal of your child's placenta. Religious, superstitious, and medicinal. You can ingest it for nutritional value, to cure or prevent postpartum depression. You can throw it into the river in the belief that your child's life will be carried on the constant stream. Or you can bury it in the ground, smooth side up, to ward off evil spirits. Whichever option you choose, the significance of your child's placenta is the same. As one life comes into being, another ends.
So it's pretty fun. A lot of those shots that are so beautiful anyway, visually come to life after the sound design is added. So I wanted to show you guys how some of this was broken down. When he's cutting the placenta, this is the gush predub, if you will, I believe. That's sorry, that's the wood predub. So it's broken into two predubs: the wood scrapes and the gush. And that continues throughout. And then there's some fun stuff here with the fire. That's one predub. Here's another one. So there's a little bit more of a tubular feeling on this predub. And then together they're pretty cool. And then the tubular gas sound continues throughout. And I get a kick out of this area. This is the piece of meat going into the fry pan. It's pretty slappy. No sizzle. The sizzles are down here. And then I think that I might have added this on the stage because I try to put this in every show I do. But take a listen to this. There's a little kind of lip movement whine thing that I can do with my mouth. That's me doing it right now. Anyway, but together, it's kind of fun.
Postpartum depression. You can throw it into the river in the belief that your child's life will be carried on the constant stream.
This is another moment where I tried to use it. It's not working that great in the stereo version as opposed to the Atmos version, or at least the LCR version. But when we cut to the blender close up, the debris is flying all over the place, which makes that shot a little bit more fun, at least to me. And then without the oven rack, it's not as fun. There's just more, again, Mark is bringing so much fun detail to this, which Knight is so appreciating.
Or you can bury it in the ground, smooth side up, to ward off evil spirits.
Anyway, so that's that sequence. I'm happy to move on to another sequence, but I did also want to mention my Foley guys. Gareth Rees-Jones and Julian Perry are also bringing a ton to this world. And although they didn't do a ton for that sequence, they are definitely contributing immensely. And I love how eager and willing they are as well. So that's cool.
I was actually, Sean, going to ask you about that.
Yeah, please.
Were we hearing any Foley in when you were playing back just now, or was that all just your work?
There were some props. Let me show you the difference here.
Okay, great.
Here are the props only. So what's so fabulous about the process is Mark gets all of the Foley back from the Foley team, and then I'll go off Sharon for a second. Hi there. Mark gets all the Foley back and is able to decide what needs to be sweetened and what doesn't. And he also has a very open dialogue with the Foley team. So there's just a lot of great collaboration between the four of us, trying to get the best sound possible for each moment of the show. And the fact that the Foley isn't coming to the stage, being the first time we're all hearing it together, is awesome. Like I said, Mark gets to hear it, Mark gets to cut against it, Mark gets to make sure that everything is in sync with each other, as opposed to, again, hearing it for the first time on the stage. Anyway, I'm just trying to kill a lot of birds before the pressure cooker starts. So that's been very helpful. All right, let me jump to another sequence. This is pretty short, but this is a weather sequence. Let me get it lined up and then I'll go. So this is with everything. Dorothy? lot of cool stuff in there. And here's a Foley thing I just wanted to point out, where it's so fun to have footsteps separate from creaks. Here's the normal footstep for Julian walking by. But then I also asked the guys to give me creaks, so I'm adding those now. And yes, they sound too loud now, but with everything in there, I love that sometimes you don't actually hear the foot down and you only hear the creak, and other times you only hear the foot down. It just makes for a much more interesting moment. So that's fun. And then the music is very heavy here. Let me show you what was done without the music here. Actually, the door itself is fantastic. Listen to what Mark did here. So I have window rattling from the wind. Which again, isn't a very realistic, not again, we haven't talked about this yet, but it's not a very realistic sound. The window actually isn't rattling, but it brings this kind of cacophony to the shot, which is awesome. So it's just kind of part of the soup, which I love. And then this pre-dub is the winds. And then I believe Foley brought this fabulous wind mobile. And then Mark also created this drone, sound design drone, which I think works really well with the music. You can't really tell that it's sound design. It's more just, oh, that was probably part of the music, which is fine with me. I love when you can't really tell. I love when there's blurred lines in between every department. So then together again, we have this. Anyway, fun stuff.
And Sean, as far as music, it sounded like it was a pretty big musical moment in the final mix. How early did you get the final score? Like, what sorts of temp music did you have to work with for this?
We definitely do get temp score to build stuff against, but it's not always the same. So which I know is a very regular thing we all deal with. But Night is pretty cool about making sure we know that there's going to be music or not. So sometimes we have the final, sometimes we don't. But either way, we have a very good sense of what the color of the music will be. Is it going to be huge? Is it going to be tiny? Is it going to be dark? Trevor is also very collaborative and happy to talk about things. You know, every once in a while we've had sequences where he and I have said, well, you cover the low end here because I'm going to cover the high end here. We haven't had to do that too much because we haven't had time, and our stuff has been marrying great enough anyway that we haven't had to have too many of those discussions. But I've done that on other, I was so grateful to be able to do that on Robots with John Powell too. He was very collaborative, and there were many sequences in that movie where we had to decide who was going to take what because there was so much going on screen. And anyway, so I do try to collaborate with the composer when needed, but and we can talk about this later, but or not. Trevor always sends stems to the mix too. And, you know, he delivers a stereo mix, but then also stereo stems, usually like 10 to 12 stereo stems. So I have a ton of freedom to balance things. ever so slightly differently. A lot of times I don't change the balance too much. I change the panning because it's Atmos. I have so much fun almost mixing the music like sound effects sometimes, because like I said, Trevor delivers all these really neat layers. So I might hear a whoosh in the music, or I might hear some scratchy, awesome thing in the music that might be cool if it flew around us for a second because of some eerie thing that's going on. So Mark's drone in this sequence that I showed you is good to just kind of give the music some girth. But there are times where Mark is also doing whooshy fun things in the sound design. So music might be in the right front speaker while Mark's stuff might be in the left rear speaker, and then they kind of meet depending on how things are going. But it's fun to have that flexibility. I wanted to show you one more sequence, and then I'm happy to answer a million questions or none or whatever you want to do. I love what I do, so I'm happy to talk about it. This last sequence is a moment where Sean is installing a camera in a nanny teddy bear because he wants to spy on this new nanny that has come to live with them because he's very suspicious of her. So again, I just want to show you the sequence without any of our contribution. Again, the PFX are fantastic. The production recordings are so good. You can hear that, and you can also get a sense of what could be added. So let me share my screen. Guess I don't have to say that out loud, but I'm thinking out loud. So there's more, but you get the idea of how, I mean, the shots are so beautiful anyway, and the music is so good, it almost works, but what we try to do is make each shot that much more interesting and that much more captivating. And so here, I'm going to actually mute the music so you can really hear the contribution. This is with everything playing except the music. I'll start at the beginning of the sequence. Sorry about that. So like I said, it's not a flashy show, but there is so much detail, and I actually find it harder to cut just the right sound than maybe a huge explosion. I love cutting huge explosions, but finding just the right sound for every moment is really time consuming and pretty difficult. So I'm very proud of how this show is turning out and the work my crew is doing. I did want to point out some fun little details. This part right here is pretty fun. This is 2 layers of the soup boiling, which I think is fine. There's a gas grill, and then there's a liquid boiling, which works great, but I like a lot of detail, and much to Mark's chagrin. No, Mark is, like I said, very willing and eager, but I asked him to cut every bubble. And it really helps that shot, I think. Anyway, just fun details. Why don't we stop looking at this, and I'm happy to answer some questions.
Actually, one question about that, Sean.
Sure.
I heard some vocal efforts by Sean in parts of that. Is that ADR or was that from set?
In actually, I am not positive looking at my dialogue stem, and that was many episodes ago, so I don't remember. But we do often record vocal efforts as ADR, but sometimes the actor is already emoting that during the shoot. So it just depends, and I'm sorry I don't remember on that particular case, but we definitely there's a scene in one of the one of the shows this season. We're in season 2 right now. We're mixing season 2, and we definitely had to get Dorothy and Leanne in for some breathing and vocal efforts, because again, that's like adding those bubbles. You know, it's just adding more detail that makes it that much more like, oh man, what's happening, and kind of pulls you in more.
Absolutely. And it sounds amazing, by the way. It's really a fantastic.
I hope you guys can
show.
hear it okay through Zoom. It's working, I hope. So, okay.
Yeah. We have an audience question from Vasu. What's it like to help materialize M. Night's unique storytelling through sound design? He's usually a pretty bold filmmaker, really good at suspense, obviously. Like, what's that like for you?
It's awesome. It's super fun. He is very bold, and it's actually very fun because a lot of his cinematography is very bold and sometimes discomforting. Like, he does a lot of close-ups and a lot of oddly composed shots, and he is very, very cool with doing that with sound too. So he wants the sound to be very organic and believable, but he's also very happy to have a million layers in there, because we all hear a million, I mean, not all of us, but all of us hear a million layers in life. And he's happy to hear those layers. And he might not want all the ones I want, or may want a different one than I want. That's fine. We're all painting pictures, but he loves layers of sound, and it's very fun. It's very fun. Not only providing those layers for him, but watching him react to those layers, because he definitely reacts in a visceral way. Like, you watch him watching the screening of the episode, and he definitely gets worked up in a cool way, as long as it's working. So it's actually very exciting. I'll tell you a story. When I was working on Glass with him, we were doing a temp mix, and being in New York, and this is not a rip on New York at all, but the buildings are closer together, and we don't have humongous stages on lots where sound proofing is no problem. If there's construction going on in a New York building, you may hear a tiny hint of it, and it doesn't get in the way of the mix. You just get used to it, but it'll be there. So anyway, we were mixing the temp mix for Glass. And there's a very long scene in a pink room in that movie, and there was construction going on in the building, and no one cared about it, but I was hearing it, and I was mixing the backgrounds for that scene, and they were just temp effects, and we hadn't really dove into the design of that room yet, but I was noticing how interesting that construction sound was in this pink room. And it wasn't screaming construction. It was kind of just this very odd, organic, irregular breathing, if you will. But it was very low end. Anyway, I loved it, and I thought it was super cool. So when it came time to actually design the sound for that scene, my neighbors were getting their house knocked down, and they were building a newer one. And so I stuck a mic out my window I took several mics and put them around my property and pointed them at this house as it got demolished. And for a good 3 days, I had so many hours of material to go through. It was ridiculous. But anyway, I got some very cool stuff, and I ended up pitching it down like I recorded at 192 K so that I could really mess with it and not have any aliasing. And I ran it through some verb and just got this. I actually was trying to recreate the sound I had heard during the temp mix for this pink room. And I did. And I guess I only used about 3 stereo pairs, but I was able to duck and weave them throughout the scene and create this almost living room, not a living room, but a room that was living. And anyway, it was just, again, it was pretty geeky, but it was so fun, and Knight loved it. And but like I said, he loves that kind of stuff. Another thing I did in Servant, which I have to admit, I've been mixing for a long time actually, and when I learned dialogue had to go in the center channel because of what was happening with people's home systems and broadcasting and what have you. And I'm getting away from that as more of us are. And there was, in one of the scenes last year, in one of the episodes, there's a newscast that is on the TV, and it's actually Dorothy is watching, like I guess we're here with Dorothy, but the TV is over here off screen. And I ended up putting the whole newscast over on the right, and it's very jarring and very odd, but it's perfect for this show because that's exactly how Knight's shooting the show. So anyway, that was a very long-winded answer, but hopefully that was helpful.
No, that's amazing. It's great that you're able to take risks, and it obviously shows in the final product that it sounds amazing. How much time do you usually get to work on an episode of Servant?
That is a wonderful question. We get about 2 hours to spot the show with Knight, and then there are 5 in the budget. There are 5 days of dialogue and ADR editing, 5 days total. 5 days total for effects and Foley editing. My Foley team gets 1 to 2 days of Foley record, barely 2 days. And then I get about 3 days to mix it, play it back, and fix. And then I have to do an ME and then all the deliverables. And because it's Atmos, the deliverables are not, hey, let's print a print and walk out. It's, there's a lot to Atmos deliverables. So I wouldn't say it's a stingy schedule, but I am the only mixer. I'm mixing it alone. And I would say that we are every single one of us on the team is using every single minute we're given, and maybe more, depending on, how we feel. But I mean, clearly my team is knocking it out of the park because they are, like I said, they're so willing and so eager, and I just so appreciate it. But I'm having the same fun on the stage because actually that leads to another thought about how long we're spending. Mark is really embracing a little bit more mixing and trying to learn more about automation and not rules, because rules are so easy to break in mixing. But my point is, if I've already mixed a scene or an episode of backgrounds, let's say, he is willing to carry that automation with his cutting if that scene comes up again. So I took all of season 1, all the final mixed effects sessions, and sent them to him. And when he was cutting and preparing season 2, he was not only using the same sounds as a lot of us do for the same scenes. I mean, if we have the same locations, we often use the same sounds, unless it's a different time of day or different weather. But if it's not, we use the same, or at least I'm okay using the same sounds. But he's also carrying the automation. And so that allows those sounds to show up to the stage, those BGs, to be almost mixed. I definitely need to tweak them here and there, but that allows me to have time to pan the dialogue, and therefore the Foley, because Foley needs to be panned if the dialogue is panned. And it allows me to mix those music stems I was talking about. Instead of just using the stereo mix from the music, I mute that and work with the stems and really get into some fun, creative Atmos mixing. So it's cool to be taking advantage of that aspect of the technology too.
We have a Facebook question from Stefano. For the musical drones in the weather sequence you showed, were the drones designed before or after hearing the composer's final score?
Mark, I actually don't know. I think they were probably designed with the temp music, but and I don't even know if Mark knows the answer to this. I don't know if the temp music was close enough to the final music that we lucked out or what have you, but I don't have a concrete answer for that one. I do know that there was music in the scene when Mark was building the scene and talking to me about the scene. I do know there was music in there, but I'm not sure if it was the correct music. So, and that
Yeah,
is
no
always,
problem.
I mean, that's always a contest, trying to, you know, if I am going to do drones, or if I am going to do something really atmospheric and sound designy, is it going to work? And that goes back to what we've been discussing before, is Knight is so into layers, and I am too, that and luckily Mark is so willing that he does build atmospheric stuff, whether it's going to work or not. And of course he thinks it's going to work, and I love what I'm hearing before I hear the music, but it needs to work together once everything is there. We've had a blast this season, just a blast this season, because there's, without giving anything away, there is a lot more hints of other powers involved in the house, and Mark ended up making, there a lot takes place in the basement this season and in the attic this season, and so Mark came up with some really neat presences and backgrounds and ambiances and drones and layers for those two rooms that we had not really experienced too much in season one. And talk about layers, it's very fun. So, but my point is, music also happens throughout a lot of those scenes, and so it's been so fun trying to find that marriage of the two coming together.
Yeah, I'm even more excited now for season 2. Speaking of kind of what you're alluding to, the show does often, even in season 1, nod to the supernatural, and sometimes plays with the notion of what's real versus what's subjective in some of these characters' heads.
Yeah.
How did that idea play a role in your sound choices, even early on in season 1?
I am a huge fan of organic sounds. I think they are far more believable. If you, as a sound designer, I approach things almost always from an organic foundation. I instead of like making something on a synthesizer or grabbing 9 plugins and stringing them together and doing something, I am more a fan of finding a pig and doing something weird with it, or finding a baby cry and doing something weird with it, or finding a metal scrape that I recorded and doing something weird with it. Because for me, and again, it's a taste thing, but for me, it gives it an organic foundation. And luckily, Knight feels the same way. So when we've been dealing with supernatural, we decided to start organic, and whispers have been a fabulous element, and those whispers might be really screwed up by the time you guys hear them, but they started with whispers. Another thing is just human vocal sounds. Again, and I'm sorry to keep alluding to season 2, but Mark did a fabulous job with baby cries in season 2, and none of us have any idea that they're baby cries, but he ended up taking sounds of babies and manipulating them so much that they turned into attic winds. And so it's a very cool organic living element that plays into that supernatural world, but yet, or is it just a baby? You know, you kind of, it's just this neat kind of makes you subconsciously wonder.
Speaking of baby cries, I think that's a really important element to the story of Servant. And there are obviously lots of instances of them, at least in season 1. How did you go about finding or recording all the varieties of those sounds?
Yes, that's a fun little story. Some of them, admittedly, are library babies. Some of them, but most of them are from a project that was very dear to my heart, which was Ice Age. And I happened to, when I was working on Ice Age, I happened to have a baby girl at the same time, and I poked her a lot. No, I recorded her for hours and made her laugh and made her cry sometimes, and just made her, you know, caught her when she was hungry, caught her when she was happy. I just did a lot of recording of her. So Mark and I have all of those sounds, and that's a lot of the, I would say that's a lot of the baby sounds. Knight and his picture crew end up pulling some, but well, I said that before. Some of them are library effects, and some of them work great that way. But I think most of the other ones that that our crew is adding is Lindsay, my daughter, who's now 20. It's crazy.
Does she know she's in the show? That her voice is
She knows she's in Ice Age, but and it's funny, Ice Age, she's actually only the laughing baby sounds in Ice Age. They did not like her cries, so we had to get other baby crying sounds for Ice Age. She's not a good crier, I guess, but they liked her laughing sounds. I think I told her about this. You know, when your kids have grown up with this all their lives, I have a son and a daughter. They're super fun about it, and anytime I'm outside and we hear something weird, my son mocks me, says, "Oh, Dad, you got to record that." You know, of course he's saying it tongue in cheek, but it's fun. And I know Lindsay has told her friends about Ice Age, but I don't remember if I've told her about Servant. I'll have to ask her.
Yeah, we have a Zoom question from Murnaz. What is your reverb workflow set up for Atmos on Foley?
I set up sends. I do Foley the same way as effects. So let's look at a Foley track. Let me share my screen. So here's a Foley track, and I have two, for every Foley track and every effects track, I have two reverb sends and then an LFE send. And then I also have, so that's literally just returning to these guys down here. And depending on what the sound is doing, I might just give a little bit of width and a little bit of height, just to kind of, for Foley, I mostly just put the sound in the room a little bit, and unless of course the sound needs to be placed, and then I will often pan it on the track Atmos wise, and then I'll pan the reverb too if it needs to be panned, and I'll even do height depending on what's going on. But if it needs to be really specifically panned, I'll drag the sound down to an object track, which is down here, a couple Foley object tracks and a few more sound effect object tracks. And the reason I don't just automate beds or objects in my session on the same track, because you can do that, I like to be able to see when I'm using a sound as an object. So I just have set up my template so that it's in a separate place. I'm able to see it very quickly. That's especially helpful when you're conforming and you don't want to lose anything. And I don't know, I hope that was the question, but I definitely treat Foley verbs very, very similarly to X verbs. It just depends on what's happening with Foley, and actually it just depends on what's happening with anything I'm mixing. I'll try to, that's another reason I have two reverbs. I don't have an indoor and an outdoor reverb or a long and a short reverb. I usually have one reverb that I use almost all the time and automate parameters on that verb. But then if I need to switch to another one really quickly, I'll use the B reverb so that I can let the A1 ring out or not have any automation glitches.
Back to the characters of the show for a moment. The character of Uncle George is pretty unsettling. His first entrance, for those who have seen the show, he walks in with these really wet, ripped shoes, and you're like insert shots of his feet. So that really stood out to me. How did you go about creating those sounds for the show?
He is creepy, and it's awesome. It's so fun to make him sound creepy too. My Foley team provided normal footsteps, which were definitely needed. And I'll get to that in a second. But then Mark added leather creaks, which was actually a great idea and not so obvious. And then he added the liquid elements. And I believe the gushy liquid elements were sponge sounds, dishwashing soap, and some bubble elements. So there was a lot going on in that small walk-in of George's. But it's interesting. I wanted to discuss that for a second. When I'm designing something, I don't know if you guys find this too, but when I'm designing something, I often get distracted by the design and sometimes forget about the normal foundation that design needs to sit in. And that's why I said the Foley footsteps were so needed, because like I said, sometimes I think, oh man, I'm going to make the best gushy sound here. And Mark did it for this area you're talking about, Eric. But if I were doing it, I think I'd get all excited about the mushy, gushy bubbles coming out of the shoes, and oh, this is going to be amazing. But without the leather creaks that Mark added, which were a great low mid sound, and then the normal footsteps that the Foley guys provided, the gushy, bubbly element wouldn't have anywhere to sit. It wouldn't. I don't think it would sound as realistic, or wouldn't be viable, because you didn't have this grounding foundation for it to sit on.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about it like that, but there's so much detail that obviously that you and your team put into those shots, and it really shows.
Yeah, and I thank you. But it is. I'm just admitting that's definitely a fault of mine. Is sometimes I get so wound up in the, oh man, I've done Foley footsteps for 20 years. Let me do this bubbly thing. I want to spend all this time on this bubbly thing, but the bubbling thing, as good as it might be, may not work without this awesome, needed, obvious foundation. And it's so great to get. It's so great to have those elements be so good too, because the other thing that could happen anytime is Knight would be like, yeah, I know we see the bubbles and I see the wetness, but let's not play those. Let's just let that be. And he didn't say that on this particular case, but he might have, and that wouldn't have mattered, because I still had fantastic heel toe Foley sounds and fantastic, great dress shoe leather creaks. That, yeah, it almost would have been fine. Almost, I like the wetness in there too. So,
yeah. Going back to M. Night for a moment, you talked about some of the detail that he looks for in the weather, and I think one element that's really important to his storytelling throughout his films and everything is the power of nature. And details like wind and trees and water can have like a fundamental impact on the story itself. So I noticed, lots of detail that you put into that work in the show, and it sounds great. I was just curious how you approach these sounds differently than in your other projects, if he gave specific directions of sounds he liked apart from those birds that you mentioned.
Right. Yes, the birds. Got to stay away from the birds. No, I don't think the approach is very different. I think he appreciates the cinematic approach that we're bringing to his show. And one way we approach that is by recording. I mean, we record all the time. If we don't have stuff in our library, if we don't have something that's going to work, we record it. And there's been many times where it's been raining and I'll grab my mic and I need rain against a window, or I need rain against a roof, or I actually went up into my attic while we were working on the first episode of season 1. There's rain for a lot of the episode, and every room needed to sound different. And rain was going to be a huge part of that. And then there's luckily some episodes in season 2 that are, there's a lot of rain as well. And Knight reiterated, hey, I want these rooms to sound different like they did last year and whatever. So I ended up recording a bunch of rain on different surfaces. And I went up into my attic last year, and I happened to have a metal chimney from either my furnace or a hot water heater. And it was a fabulous detailed element, because it wasn't just your normal pitter patter rain on ceramic or wood or shingle. It had that metal ting to it, which was awesome. So that, just little details like that. I try to capture things, and I know Mark does the same thing. When we don't have what we need, we record it. I do the same thing with winds. I'm often trying to record different winds or make different winds. And, but I don't, to answer your original question, I don't think I approach them any differently on this project. It's just that I do know that I need to approach, I don't on purpose, because I know Night wants it to be, I feel like we're making a half-hour feature every week. And I mean, TV sounds amazing these days, so I don't even know why I said that, because I think they're both, you know, all the clients want the same quality. It's just that we're approaching it the way I'd learned, which was in the feature world. So
Yeah, it's good to hear that, because he seems to even write it into the story itself. You know, like sometimes wind will have a moment, or things like that. It sounds great, but I was just curious, yeah, if there was any difference in your approach.
well, no, so that leads to another thing we can quickly talk about, which might have been a question later, but there is an episode last season 109, the second to the last episode, where there is no score for the entire first 15 or 16 minutes of the show, and Knight really wanted the winds and the weather to score the show, and it's a brutal show. It's a show where we find out some pretty crazy details about exactly what happened to this family, and the winds, or the lack of winds, or the drapes moving, or the curtains fluttering, were just an amazing layer of power brought to the episode. And the fact that there was no music made those moments even more powerful. So that was really fun. But that, again, that was not just throwing any old wind in there. That was a big exercise for all of us involved. And then once Knight heard it, we spent a lot of time on that show getting just the right swell at just the right time. Even if visually it wasn't what he, even if we had matched it visually, he was like, no, this has to breathe a certain way. And anyway, it's very cool, and it ended up really great. But it was a lot of work on the winds and the curtains, and finding the right sound for those curtains, and fun exercises.
Shifting gears for a moment, Sean, you've sorry, I have my question here. You've lived and worked in New Jersey for a number of years, but prior to that, you mentioned you lived in Los Angeles. I was just curious what it's like working as a supervising sound editor and mixer in the New York, New Jersey area, and what's helped you find success out there.
It's super fun. I love working as a supervising sound editor and a mixer and an editor. I love what I do, so I actually don't mind where I do it. I do a ton of work at home in New Jersey, and then wherever the client wants to finish, LA, New York, I'll go. But I love it, and I feel like my connections in LA have really helped a ton, because not only have I been continuing to be able to work for people in LA, I have also, when I moved here to the East Coast, a really good mixer friend of mine hooked me up with a fantastic supervising sound editor here, and we worked for years together. And it's just wonderful having connections on both coasts, because that means a little bit, a few more opportunities for work. and I do like working, so that's always a bonus.
That's great. And also, just you touched on this a little bit, but towards the end of season 1, we do learn some things apart from the flashbacks. I guess different sorts of flashbacks. There's some truths revealed about Leanne's character, and what might have motivated her to take this job as the nanny. I don't want to give too much away of the plot of season 1, but just was curious how did what's revealed factor into your sound choices for the season? Because there are some ideas at play that we don't necessarily know early on that I thought were important to the story.
Yeah, I think that I might answer that the same way I did about the whispers and the human sounds and the organic sounds. We as viewers still aren't sure where Leanne came from. So having sounds that we can relate to but don't necessarily know what they are is something Knight felt strongly about, and luckily I did too. Again, it goes back to that whole agreement on organicity, organicness, being organic. I think when a sound, and again, this has nothing to do with Servant, but one thing that really helped me as a sound designer a long time ago was when I was working on robots. The whole entire movie was about metal characters. Metal, metal, metal. There was nothing human at all except their voice. Everything was metal, and it was. I was actually having a hard time relating to them. They were still fun and likable characters to me, but I felt like something was missing. And when we were working on the Foley for that show, I decided that not only should the robot be, interacting with a piece of metal or something, but it should be human against metal, or it should be flesh against metal as opposed to metal against metal. And it gave this fantastic organicness to the actions in robots, and I've always kind of stuck that in my head. Anyway, so it made the characters more relatable, and I've kept that in my head and tried to apply that to a lot of other things. And again, that's where keeping this supernatural angle of Leanne more organic and kind of tangible based has been helpful. And to be honest with you, I don't know exactly still where Leanne is coming from. I don't even know. Knight and the writer are still working that out, and so it's an interesting journey, but so far it's working for Knight and me, and hopefully the viewers.
Yeah, I can say so. I think so.
Okay, good. Okay, good. Okay, good.
In working closely with M. Night Shyamalan on this show and Glass as well, and for more than one season of this show now, was there anything in particular about his preferences that surprised you?
I think I've been doing this long enough that not surprises me, but I'm very grateful that he is so willing to hear possibilities, and I love that he leans towards being bold with sound. I love that he, there are so many clients that just want to hear the words, and that's all they think is needed, and that's fine, and a lot of times that works, but he isn't that way. He really wants to hear the words and a bunch of other things, and that just makes it so fun. So I don't know if that surprised me, but I definitely am grateful for it all the time, because it just makes our jobs so fun and so rewarding, and he is so appreciative. He's very demanding, but he's very appreciative, and I love that. I love working for people that appreciate what we do.
Yeah, that's got to be rewarding.
It is.
And then my last question, what was the biggest challenge you faced in this show, and how do you and your team go about solving it?
That is a very interesting question, especially for where we are and at this time. I would say the biggest challenge was the fact that Knight was not a big fan of coming to the city. He lives on a beautiful property outside of Philly and is happy to stay there, as I would be too. And he has a fabulous screening room, and he wanted to watch the episodes in his screening room, but he wanted to do it real time. And I guess I'm not that old school, but I'm up there in age, and I learned the way I learned was clients come to the stage and you do the fixes with them, and then you shake hands or hug at the end and you move on. And I love having the client in the room with me, because it is a fabulous time to get to know their I love just interacting with people anyway, so I love getting to know him as a person, but I love getting to know what works for him. I can watch his face. I can read his body language. And anyway, I like having the client in the room with me, but he did not want to do that for the playbacks of season 1. And so Warner Brothers, I mix this show at Warner Brothers, and they are fantastic to me and very helpful. And we figured out a way to screen a 7-1 mix in real time to his screening room, and then he and I Skype or Zoom while we're working together. So I hit play on the stage, and less than 2 seconds later, he's watching what I'm playing or fixing, and then he can react to it via Skype, and it actually works incredibly well. And it seems kind of silly talking about it now for where we are in life, because we're all doing that now, I would think. But it was such an amazing prep job for me to get used to working like that and realizing it can work. And it was wonderful because he even allowed me to come down to his screening room, and I think I mixed episode 1, and then I took it with me and took it down to his screening room to watch it, because I was intimate with how it sounded at Warner Brothers. I wanted to hear how it sounded. I wanted to hear what he would be hearing once I hit play at Warner Brothers. And I also wanted to know how loud he wanted to hear it and all that stuff. So it was a wonderful working out for something that I thought was going to be a fairly big hurdle, but it works great. And so we've been doing season 2 that way too. And it's working fine. But it was an interesting little mental hurdle for me to get over.
I imagine that must have prepared you really well for what we're all in the middle of right now.
Totally. I'm still a huge fan of human interaction. You know, it's so bumming not to be able to shake hands with people right now. And like I said, the hug at the end is so gratifying, but we're finding ways, and we're all adjusting, and it's a huge change, but it's still very, very, very possible. And I would think as technology improves, it's going to even be easier than there are things that we don't even know about, I'm sure, that are going to make it even easier in the years to come, or in the months to come. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, Sean, the show sounds fantastic. I can't wait for season 2. And I just wanted to thank you so much for your time and for sharing these clips and all these great answers with us tonight.
It's been my pleasure. I thank you guys so much. And like I said, so appreciate that Servant is even worth talking about, because we put a lot of work into it and we're very proud of it. But again, it's not a loud, hey, listen to us type show. So it's awesome that you guys I appreciate it very much. Very, very sincerely.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing it. And yeah, just because it's not full of explosions doesn't mean that it's not full of great sound. And you can really hear some of the little details that go into the Foley and the backgrounds and the other stuff. It was a great job. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks so much for joining us again, Sean. We appreciate it. And I think, I'll be looking out for season 2.
I think it's coming out first of the year. I think that's what they're trying to do. It got delayed a little bit, but I think the last schedule I saw was first of the year. So hopefully that happens.
Great.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you,
Thank
Sean.
you so much, Sean.
Have a great night.
Eric, great job. Thank you. Thanks for moderating.
Thank you, Mark. And thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, guys.